Israel's left-wing parties have united into a new party, hoping to, I don't know what they're hoping to do, but they will run as one party in future elections. That is going to be the second topic today of the reality show. Yeah, this is an old school uh, episode of the reality show, like we did in the early days of the show. We have two topics we're going to talk about. The first topic is what the rescued hostages, some of them get wrong. So Noah Argamani, who we've talked about on this channel, probably the most famous of the hostages, at least those who are no longer hostages, recorded a video for the protest, the Saturday night protest in Tel Aviv. Those happen every Saturday. They are protests officially calling to release the hostages, but unofficially there's more to that. And she's not the first. So we're going to talk about what they are saying and what they're getting wrong. Welcome to the reality show. So in her video, which I don't think there's a reason for us to play because it's mostly her thanking just what she gets right. Of course, she thanks the IDF, and she of course mentions and thanks the family of Arnon Zamora, who was killed in the rescue operation. But the very fact that she makes this video and makes it for these protests and again is not the first to make it, kind of there's a few issues there. One of which is what these protests are calling for is capitulation to Hamas. They are demanding that the Israeli government do whatever is needed to make up the difference in the negotiation with Hamas, negotiation which those of us here on the channel have been very clear that we do not think they should happen at all. But in those negotiations, Israel offers to release terrorists. They offer various things around the war itself, as in not meeting more of the targets that Israel set out at the beginning of the war. And essentially, the demand is to do more of what we know is part of the reason that October 7th happened, and that specifically the hostage taking on October 7th happened because the success of past hostage taking by terrorists is undeniable. 1,000 plus terrorists were released in exchange for Gilad Shalit, including Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind of October 7th, and every terrorist who is released now is very likely to go back to at least attempting to kill Jews. And again, the four hostages rescued in that heroic operation were rescued. They were not bargained for. Not only were they rescued, a bunch of people who could have continued to commit terrorist attacks will not be able to do so following that operation. So, yeah, Morgan, your thoughts on the recent comments by Noah and generally what some of the hostages have been saying.
Well, I don't think this is something that's got wrong only by the hostages. I think this is something that's gone wrong by a lot of people, which is why I think it's worth talking about. And to be fair, as you say, a lot of the video, I don't think there's too much wrong with. It's mostly what she's saying towards the end, where I think there's something off. And the comment that she makes is something to the effect of, "We must do everything possible to bring the hostages home." And now it's not that I that I don't want the hostages to be rescued, or I think there's something objectionable about that. But I think if the main goal for the war is to rescue the hostages, then I think you're off on a slightly wrong foot, which means you're probably going to do slightly wrong things. Because I think surely the main objective for the war has to be the defeat of Hamas and the removal of that as a threat. And it actually isn't the savior of the hostages, particularly in the context that you're talking about, Razi, where the hostages have been taken to kind of tie Israel's hands behind its back, as has been done before. And if you make rescuing the hostages your primary objective and your primary goal, I think actually that to achieve that goal, what you would end up doing is calling for things which wouldn't result in the destruction of Hamas as a threat. You might end up calling for the cessation of the war. And I think that's probably why you see sentiment coming in these kind of protests, I think, from some members of the hostages' families. Again, this is rather understandable, I have to say, but calling for things like for Netanyahu to make a deal, or protesting against Netanyahu because they think he's going to frustrate a deal, and so on. If your primary goal is to just get the hostages home, you're going to want to do anything like striking a peace deal with Hamas, or a hostage deal, or a swap, a ceasefire, whatever, in order to get them home. And if you do that, then let's say you got a ceasefire, then what's going to happen is just the kind of thing that we've been, worried about and warning about for the last, 7 or 8 months now, which is that the can gets kicked down the road and the conflict is going to break out again in a few years' time. And as understandable as it may be for the hostages or hostages' families, or people who are just particularly invested in that, to want the hostages to be rescued, if you allow this kind of confusion to go on about what the primary objective for the war is, then I think you'll end up having that. You'll end up having this bad outcome. And that's why I think this Noah Argamani gets this wrong.
Daniel.
Just quickly, because many people are saying in the chat how these hostages shouldn't be, in a sense, forced to speak out or something like that. So I don't think they are forced to. I think they come out of their own free will. And so just so I walk from this episode in the best way, I'd like to just stand up a little bit for Noah. So basically, she did this like 2-minute video, and one thing she did mention is that actually her boyfriend is still held in captivity by Hamas. So if you give someone benefit of the doubt, you would want the best thing that can happen for to save someone like your boyfriend or your family members. So, but that much, I think, greater it is to see when hostages or the families of the hostages do actually see the principles behind it and can actually see why the destruction of Hamas has to be the top priority instead of rescuing the hostages. The main problem with putting the rescuing of the hostages as the main goal is when at some point Hamas offers a ceasefire deal, which would include releasing of all hostages, then you are pretty much done for. The international community is going to go against you, because if you've been saying since the war started that the rescuing of the hostages has been the main goal, now that you have the offer of the table of getting those hostages, if you don't take it, you are seen as someone who, completely gave up on that goal. So that's why, and I mean, to a large extent, the rescuing of the hostages has been the goal, but the destruction of Hamas has many times been, at least in some cases, viewed as the main point, although they were sort of viewed as equal or as sort of together. So I think that's the main reason why you have to support, or why the destruction of Hamas has to be the main thing, is so you actually can be consistent. But so I mentioned it's really rare, but so much greater to see when the hostages or the hostages of the families have the bright view, because this is something we've talked about in December when 3 hostages were killed by the IDF by mistake. And actually, mother of one of the hostages has called the unit, the unit that participated in that. And I don't remember exactly what was it, but it was really touching, because she said something along the lines of, this is not your fault. It is Hamas who committed October 7th. It is Hamas who took the hostages. It's Hamas who put you in the position where you have to act in this way, when it is very hard to, because Hamas has been using even recordings of Hebrew recordings to basically lure in IDF hostages, has been using the crying of babies to lure in IDF hostages, I mean, they don't even wear military uniforms. So the IDF soldiers are being in this position. And when you see, as I said, the families of hostages actually understanding it and being behind it, that shows me really the heroism when it comes to those people.
Yeah. yeah, I remember we were talking about that, and that was truly an amazing statement at the time by the mother of one of the hostages who were killed, because if there's anybody who you can forgive for being angry and possibly angry not at the people she should be angry about, it's that mother of that grieving mother. And and yet she made a statement that if only the leadership in Israel were as rational as her, I think this war would look very different. Yeah, she um, she acknowledged the fact that it is the goal of Hamas for there to be as much death as possible in Gaza. This was not in her words, but as much death as possible in Gaza of whoever possible, whether it's soldiers, whether it's hostages, whether it's Palestinians. Hamas wants more death in Gaza and does whatever it can to make sure that happens, whether it is by killing by themselves killing people, or by causing such situations where friendly fire ends up killing people who should live. Um, yeah, it also on the point of hostages speaking out and using their fame or whatever. I absolutely support them using, the fact that they're famous in whatever way possible. They went through things that we can talk about, but not really imagine what it's like to go through what they went through, and the fact that they made it out alive, which is, of course, not something to take for granted, but in a sense, it's a surprise. It's a surprise that some hostages are still alive. They should use it in whatever way they can, for their own benefit and their own gain. I just think in this case, and I believe it was Andrei Kozlov who was the first to do this days after he was rescued, to call on people. He called on people to go to the Saturday protest and demand a hostage deal. And that's so I support them using their fame, but of course they will be open to scrutiny when they based on how they use that fame. And yeah, so we were talking about how even with the title of this episode, we are possibly gonna piss some people off, which is understandable. I saw somebody tweet yesterday, I think it was in Hebrew, but I'm not sure. It was about this video by Noah Argamani, and the person said that uh, they were surprised by her accent because it's not a fully native Israeli accent, and people were upset with him because of that. And so yeah, I think, look, of course, we're all very glad that they're home, and we hope that the ones who aren't home yet will be home. But then once you are back and you express certainly political views, you are opening up yourself to criticism. Morgan.
Yeah, sorry, let me just jump in because there are a couple of things I wanted to mention. So first, someone in the chat is saying all I hear from the hostages is Stockholm syndrome. So I don't know about you, but I haven't heard any of the hostages like actively like advocating for Hamas, like, oh yeah, they took care of us nicely, they're really great, we didn't really have to do anything, they were like all nice. So even in this video, so something Noah Argamani has mentioned, she talked about how I wish I had the exact line, but she mentioned something about love, how we need love right now and not hate. And yeah, that is something that sort of irks me in a wrong way, because there is emotions are good, emotions are useful, and sometimes you need hate. Uh, I mean, in this case, you could even argue for needing love. I mean, you need love for the Israeli people and what it actually means, and what it does need in this case is hatred for Hamas, and this should fuel you into basic understanding that the complete destruction of Hamas is the only way forward, is the only way to prevent future hostages. So even if you have love for hostages, again, these emotions, as Ayn Rand says, emotions are not tools of cognition. What it basically means is just because you have an emotion guiding you in a certain way, that doesn't have any truth quality. It doesn't mean this is right. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It just gives you a certain feeling about it. You still need to see what is behind that feeling and what is the actual reality about what should be done. So it's just something I wanted to quickly put in.
Sure. And well, just on the point of whether the hostages should speak out, I agree with you, Razi, that they should speak out and use their notoriety if that's what they want to do, because they've certainly suffered enough to earn that. I would just generally say that I generally feel a kind of resistance towards, I don't know, any kind of sentimentalism in politics. And I'm not suggesting that that's not what Noah Agamani is really doing, except maybe that comment at the end that you're talking about, Daniel, that there's a bit of sentimentality around that. But the people who are putting her up there to want to make this kind of statement and this kind of message, they will feel sort of very pleased that they've got someone there who's a hostage and who's such an iconic hostage like Noah Agamani. And they feel like their message will come across a lot more effectively because it's her saying it as opposed to anyone else. And obviously so. That's how they would feel. However, I generally think that's something to be resisted. And this is something that politicians in all spectrums of of life on any particular topic, whenever they're pronouncing on it, this is something that they would love to do. If they can find some person around whom they can wrap the national sentiment to make the message come across more effectively, they will, no matter how right or how wrong that message is, or how good for the country that message is. And I think that's something probably that is being done around the hostages. I haven't looked at too many of the other statements any of them have made, like the one you were referring to, Razi. But if they're being put up to make statements kind of like this, then my general impression is negative. I think this kind of thing shouldn't be going on. As for the comment you were talking about, Daniel, about love not hate, I also picked up on that as something that I thought was just a bit off, and it's a shame because it's the common kind of thing that you end up hearing people saying around really serious issues. I mean, even just in another context, when Britain was experiencing, a spate of terrorist attacks in the mid-2010s, all that people seem to really be able to say, and all that Theresa May, who was the Prime Minister at the time, could say was that we need to learn to love and not hate. And that's one such just a saccharine kind of cliche that it doesn't really show, I think, serious thinking about the issue. But as you say, Daniel, it isn't rational to love people in these kind of situations. It isn't rational to love Hamas. And it's not clear exactly what Noah Agamani meant by embracing love and not hate. And, you were speaking about, I think, what Rand had to say about emotions. I don't think Rand has this to say exactly, but this is an understanding of emotions, which I find quite compelling, which is that emotions are motivations to action. And if someone is a threat to you and you evaluate them as a threat, it's only rational to feel some kind of negative emotion in response to them, like hatred. And that will motivate you to do something about the threat. And if you were to be threatened by someone like Hamas and your experience was to love them, that was your emotion, that would be a completely irrational, strange emotion. I just don't see how you could feel love in that situation. So when people come out with cliches like this, we need to embrace love, not hate. As literal advice, I think it's very bad, and I think it unfortunately just shows a reliance upon, second-handed kind of cliches rather than serious thinking about the issue.
Yeah, and Clementine puts it a bit more harshly in the chat, saying, "I honestly don't think we should take anything she said in that video too seriously." In a sense, she didn't really say much in that video, and yeah, I also think maybe she was asked to make a video, and she made one just because she was asked. But yeah, it did look like she was trying to say as little as possible, and those love not hate cliches are considered not saying anything, but it does say a lot. Yeah, you should absolutely, if you look at Palestinian culture and you feel love rather than hatred, then you're not being rational. The rational emotional response to that is hate, and yeah, you don't actively control your emotions, but you actively choose your values, and they determine what your emotional reaction would be. And yes, the emotional reaction to Palestinian culture and to what we see come out of it is absolutely hatred. Um, so another issue which comes up from time to time, and you know, unfortunately, we know what these people are doing to hostages and female hostages. Paul says, "I hope they're not about to give birth to terrorist children." That's in reference to female hostages who are still in Gaza, and it has been 9 months nearly since since the hostages were taken. Yeah, this is a thing that that we can't ignore that is a possibility. I will say, and I think this probably goes without saying, but we'll say this anyway, that if children are born of this, they are not they have free will. They will be um, you know who they are will determine in early year will be determined in early years based on their education, and later on their choices, very much informed by their education. So yeah, children born not out of consent are human beings, just like those who are planned. Thank you, PC, for the super chat. PC says anti-Israel people only hate. I think that's generally true. You don't see much love in those anti-Israel protests, and when you see supposed love, it is motivated by hate. That like we used to make the point. I used to make the point that there's no such thing as pro-Palestinian protests. There are only anti-Israel protests. Um, Now I'm kind of more okay with calling it pro-Palestinian, just because I think there is a distinct Palestinian culture, and those protests often look like elements of that culture. We were talking on the Daily Objective about the Pride Parade, and how there was some protesting going on there. But Daniel, you mentioned there were people arrested in advance because they were planning disturbances, which you don't see in pro-Israel protests. And I've said I don't support uh, blocking the roads for good causes or bad causes. I don't think you should. That's part of free speech. But you don't see pro-Israel protesters, you know, planning to destroy shops, and as the Palestinians are. Because yeah, you reflect the values that got you to that position in the first place in the way you express your views. Daniel.
Yeah, sorry, I'm watching the chat too much because someone again is saying that the hostages are speaking out nicely about Hamas and are not saying anything bad. Again, I haven't seen anything like that. Most of the hostages, or anything I've seen from the hostages, they talk about the harsh either environment they were kept in, what they were forced to. I mean, I'm trying to remember if we played that video, but there was one video with one of the rescued hostages, and I think some social media person. And yeah, she was talking about, how the whole time she was there. So, I mean, what is it now? Like 8 months. She was able to take shower like 4 times or 5 times or something like that. So yeah, kept in horrible conditions. And again, while this episode is kind of talking about, while we disagree with a lot of things the hostages are saying, I don't think we should like completely erase what has happened to them. What has happened to them is horrible, and the Hamas is at fault, and sort of undermining the hostages, I think is undermining the whole cause. Trying to remember, I think there was one more point I wanted to make, but now I'm losing it.
Well, you have 35 minutes to make it later on. Morgan?
I don't have too much else to say on this topic. Just that, I don't really want to criticize Noah Agamani, or the hostages. I just there's a relevant point here, and it goes beyond the hostages. As I was saying, these are kind of points that are made by many, many people. And the hostages who are making these points, like Noah Gamani, are picking up on things in the culture, and that's why I don't. These people have been through enough. They don't need a shellacking from any of us. But so just to say that.
So Willful Thinker says, would there be love for a heterosexual pride parade? No, that would be homophobic. But also, more seriously, why do you need first of all, pride is the wrong word in both cases because you're proud of your achievements, not of immutable characteristics, which for all we know, sexual orientation is an immutable characteristic. It's not something you choose. Um, yeah, I wouldn't attend that. I wouldn't attend either of those pride parades. But anyway, right at the end of the previous show, we got a super chat from Garbled Words. Thank you, Garbled Words. This is off topic for this show, but it was something discussed on the previous show. Garbled Words says Jacobson, the rabbi that was mentioned in the previous super chat, was a student of Herschel who walked with Martin King and modernized, mysticized, and opened the doors to LGBTQIA. Yeah, well, I mean, neither religion nor the left need to be mysticized more. They're already pretty much there. And we also got a super chat a few days ago, an indirect super chat. So it wasn't on YouTube, but I do want to mention it was a very generous super chat from Mary Bachman. Thank you, Mary. Mary said, "Happy birthday, Kirk." This was right before Kirk Wilcox's birthday. This is a gift for the Ayn Rand Center UK. Thanks for supporting the cause with laughter. So thank you for that, Mary. And all right, we are halfway through the show, and we are
I
we have
actually,
something else to add on this
yeah,
before we
yeah,
go to
yeah.
the next topic.
So I have a joke. Okay. So you mentioned the idea. Okay, I'm not gonna mention the joke because it's so funny. I cannot even say. But basically, something else. The point I wanted to bring up is the idea of so we talked about love and how they don't love, but the actual problem is, and the first time I saw it like really well was with I think his name is Jesse Lee Peterson, this sort of like a right-wing podcaster, and he's always about love. He's like, I love everybody. I love black people. I love white people. He's all about love. And I think with him, it's really apparent that, yeah, there is this idea of basically love for everybody. But what it actually brings in is this idea of equality between all people with no actual reason behind it. So yeah, you love the Palestinians, you love the Israelis. They are the same people. There's nothing different about them. So when it comes to something like this, you basically cannot even fathom the idea of October 7th. And basically your goal is someone said tell the joke. No, it's I cannot even say because it's not even gonna be that good now. But yeah, the idea is that basically all people are equal, and yeah, it is what it brings you to basically to basically not be able to like have an opinion and basically expecting uh yeah, like advocating for like ending the war without actually having like any principles behind it, and basically okay, I think I got my point across. I'm so
All
sorry.
right, I'm really terrified of what that joke may have been. I keep thinking, we when we go off the air and you tell us what the joke is, let's make sure that we are off the air and then we're not recording or anything.
Is the joke going to be available to platinum members and above only?
Maybe to Midas, well, our Midas Mulligan members have our roundtable right after this show. So maybe Daniel can say it there, although Midas Mulligan members, I don't want any of them canceling over a joke, so I don't know what. By the way, I do have to say, Jesse Lee Peterson is not a right-wing commentator. He's a parody of a right-wing commentator. I know it's not officially a thing, but I do not for a second believe that he is genuine. He is a parody and sometimes somewhat funny one. But no, he's not real. All right. Speaking of things that aren't real or shouldn't be real. The Israeli left has united, at least the two main left-wing parties, Labor and Meretz, have united. Longtime viewers of this channel will remember, not that long time actually, the last Israeli election, when we did a post-election show, I took a few minutes to have my own obituary for Meretz, celebrating their demise because they, for the first time in 30 years since their founding, didn't make it past the minimum threshold required to make it into parliament. I don't know if that was if that celebration was premature because now they have two seats. They're going to get two seats of the first 10 and then two of the next 10 in this new party, which means that they think they're going to get many seats, and they think that left-wing ideas will experience some sort of resurgence. Now, in terms of branding, it's I find this interesting. The name of this party is the Democrats, and it's the timing of the reveal is interesting. The Democrat, I think the Israeli Labor Party is the party or the remnants of the party that ran Israel for the first 29 years of the country's existence, and then a few times since has done some good and a lot of bad, a lot of harm. And yeah, now they're rebranding themselves into this with this new name. So yeah, while I give you a few more seconds, guys, to collect your thoughts on this, I will answer Akira's super chat. Thank you, Akira. Akira says, "Are you convinced that Jesse Peterson is a parody?" Yes, just because nobody is actually that stupid. That's the first thing. I mean, I see it sometimes in sitcoms, like, Joey from Friends is not a real thing. It's like you can, it's an exaggeration of a stupid person. That's in his case. Now, some of the things are so over the top, like, he's black, but he's a sort of white supremacist. He says we built one of the things he used to say is we built ships that are exactly like the ships they brought slaves over to send black people back to Africa. I mean, that's parody. That guy is a joke, the kind of joke that I think is probably similar to what Daniel was about to say and luckily forgot or couldn't get through it. But yeah, I don't believe it for a second.
I didn't forget it. I couldn't do it in one breath without laughing because
Well, I believe that's for the better. Morgan.
Oh, oh,
Well,
Well, whoever wants to go first, I'm not going to force it.
well, Daniel, I think you probably have more to say about Israeli domestic politics, so why don't you go ahead?
yeah, sure. So you mentioned the new name, the Democrats, and it's sort of interesting to see how sort of like similar names are used in all of different countries and all mean something else. Because in Slovakia, we actually have a new party called the Democrats. And it's actually the second party I would vote for if my first choice was not here. So it's interesting to see what it means in like different countries. And especially in the Israeli politics, since you have like about 20 parties founded every day, you sort of get you sort of have to come up with new names. But it's interesting to see what was the reasoning behind calling it, because sometimes, yeah, the Democrats is used as sort of like this somewhat like left or some sort of center left call, or you could also see something like Popular Front, or well, that's going more socialist. But when it comes to Israel, it's really hard to understand calling a party Democrats, because it's really focusing on something that doesn't seem as essential. It's not like, because so just the reason why I brought up my country, Slovakia, is we have a pretty big problem with the democratic process. So the democratic opposition, or similar to how you have it in South Africa, you have the Democratic Alliance is, I think, the actual name. So we have this sort of these sort of places when I think it makes sense. But talking more about the actual parties joining, so as we mentioned, it's a Meretz and Labor. So, I was researching before the show both of these parties, and pretty quickly I started becoming a little bit of Labor fanboy because I learned, Labor used to be for a long time pretty much the main party in Israel during many of the important wars, during the Sinai War, during the 6 Day War, during the Yom Kippur War. All of these were handled by Labor, and I would argue those wars were handled relatively well. So I was, almost becoming a fanboy. But something I quickly realized, and this came with merits. Basically, I think the big problem that happened with this party is that war and finishing the war properly is a big part of the conflict. But actually, what matters in this specific context is also the occupation, and the occupation being done right, which is something I would say the Labor hasn't done. And actually, so when Meretz was created, it was a merger of three different political entities, and they were created before the 92 legislative election. They won the third most seats, and they joined the government with Labor and basically helped to pave the way for Oslo Accords. And which led to the creation of the Palestinian Authority, and I would argue led to many of the problems we have today. So while if Labor was now in power, they might have handled the war better, although the Labor today is much different than the Labor of the past. While we might have seen a bit better handling of the conflict, the big problem, I think, is the occupation, and the occupation being done right. Because as we said, Israel used to control Sinai, used to control Gaza, used to control all of the West Bank, and they gave it up because they weren't able to suppress the terrorism that was happening there. They weren't able to actually manage the occupation and transform the Palestinian people. So I think that will be the biggest problem I would have with this party.
Yeah, I just want to quickly say none of the people involved in the Labor Party in the 6 Day War are going to be involved in this new party. So I don't know if they deserve the credit for that. Morgan.
Well, I know far less about Israeli domestic politics than you guys. I guess the important thing about this merger then is to ask, and I'm really asking you guys. So, what is the consequence of this? What will be the importance of this? Is this going to be an important kind of element on the Israeli left that could oppose Netanyahu? Are they going to have a bad position on the current conflict, on the war? So, what's the consequence of this going to be?
So let me just quickly jump me in, and then Razi can give a bit more, probably better context. But something that's interesting about the Israeli politics is that basically all the parties are described as Zionists. So you don't really have many parties that would advocate for the abolishment of Israel, and in many cases, you really, especially after the Second Intifada, you actually have very few that even are very cozy to the idea of establishing of the Palestinian state. Even the because I think it is the position of Labor of it is a two-state solution, but I think even they would argue for basically the Palestinian state not having any military. So again, it is not the actual full commitment to the idea of the two-state solution as the sort of international community would see it. I keep running out of. I think I had one more point, and I keep. Oh yeah. So something you have to remember about Israeli politics is that every election you have about 20 parties joining it, and I'm exaggerating, but not by a lot. So we mentioned um, in the last election, Meretz didn't get in. Labor did get in, but with like 4 seats. So something we've seen since October 7th is that many, especially Likud, has been falling down a lot. But so I've been watching what has this resulted in it, what has this resulted in, and while the current government has been losing the sort of their percentages in the opinion polls, I don't think we've seen that much. We've seen a big rise of the second biggest party. Is it called the Yesh Atid? Is that the name, Razi? Yeah. So we've seen a bit of that, but we've also seen a rise in what is it, Yetzma Yehudit. I'm really learning these names, which is the more uh which is the party of Ben Gvir. So while we have seen rise of, let's say, the more sort of like middle parties, we have seen a big rise of also the right-wing parties. And we actually, I don't think we've noticed that much rise on in this sort of like left-wing parties. And I think it is because in a sense, you don't really have that much of a big difference when it comes to what should be done about the in this conflict. Like you don't really have parties, and you probably don't even have that among the Israeli people. Really, the sentiment of we should establish a two-state solution. What you see now is, uh, people are arguing for some sort of ceasefire, but even that isn't actually that popular among the Israeli people. So, Razi?
Um, Yeah, thank you, Tragedy and Comedy, for the super chat. Your username is perfect for this topic of the new left wing party. Thank you, Daniel, for the super chat. Thank you, Tragedy and Comedy, for being a member for a month. Tragedy and Comedy says, got the joke telepathically, LMAO. Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Tragedy and Comedy, for not repeating it. Thank you. Well, I don't know what was in it, which is why we should keep it behind a paywall at the very least. Thank you, Garbled Words, for the super chat. Garbled Words says, my hypothesis is that the good-intentioned boomer ideas inspired by real historical oppression has led to the bad, woke, altruistic ideas of today. I think you're right. Although, again, I don't know to what extent they were fully good intentions, because the fact that you're against something bad does not mean that you are good. And, so opposing the fact that there's discrimination against women or discrimination against racial minorities is a good thing, but it doesn't mean you're offering something better. Many of the protesters against the fact that there was discrimination against Black people were Marxists. I think many of the feminist protests were probably Marxist or Marxism adjacent, fellow travelers, so to speak. So yeah, and I do think in a sense it has come full circle, certainly with the trans movement being, not in favor of or not favorable towards actual women and more favorable towards men who pretend to be women. Where was this joke? Oh yeah, this is ideology's joke. I don't know if this was what you were gonna say, but he said, I too was a male trapped in a woman's body, but then my mom gave birth. Uh, Great, but you don't have to add the word joke there. Like that ruined it for me. But other than that, great. Thank you, Armin, for the super chat. All right, a few things I wanted to say on the topic. So yeah, Daniel, did you say something like they helped lay the foundations for Oslo? No, they are responsible for Oslo. I mean, it's them.
They
It's
helped
labor and
pave the
Meretz.
way is the word I used.
What?
They helped pave the way.
Yeah, that's really downplaying their actual role, which is it's on them. I believe the Labour Party had 44 seats in after the election of 1992, and Meretz had 12, if I'm not mistaken, which which is quick math is 56 seats out of 120, which is almost a majority already. And they had the support of Shas, the Sephardic religious Orthodox party, which is basically a party that is proudly bought. You give money to their indoctrination system or their education system, as they call it, and they will vote whatever you tell them. And some other people from the right who were bought with ministerial jobs. But yeah, this was a Meretz policy with Labor's help, although Labor was the ruling party, and we are living it, to this day, and we really lived Oslo on October 7th. So the fact that these people and when I say none of the labor people from the Six-Day War are involved in this party, well, some of the people who were around for Oslo will be around for this, and again, those who weren't around back then are still on the side of Oslo. So yeah, these people have no shame, and they should have some shame. It was also, we mentioned this, you know. Um, the kibbutzim were targeted. These were left-wing people. These were the people of the so-called peace movement. These were voters of presumably Meretz, and if not Meretz, Labor. These are the people who would vote. I mean, this new party preemptively lost votes when their so-called peace partners across the fence with Gaza showed the world who they are. So the fact that this is still a thing is really disgusting. Just a couple of other points. You mentioned that the Likud has been doing really well really badly in the polls after October 7th. That's true. They are bouncing back a little bit, and I think the fact that the world is coming after Netanyahu for the things that he is doing rather than for not doing the things that he should be doing is helping him. But something that is gonna also have an impact is the coming unification of some parties on the right, which surprisingly has not been announced yet, mostly because they're arguing about who's going to lead it. But that party could be a game changer. That party, I think, could actually win the election, whereas I don't think the Democrats are at all in the running.
Can you say who?
Who, what
What
who's
parties?
the parties? So now I need to remember all the names of all these parties. By the way, you said there's like 20 parties in each election. Running, there's
No, no,
usually
no. I mean in the parliament.
yeah. In
Running's
parliament,
probably
I
like
think it's
50.
less, but running in an election, it's usually more. So the parties involved are Israel Beitenu, which is Avigdor Lieberman's party. There's Gidon Saar's party. I never remember the names of any of them. I think this is I don't remember, but a few big ones that are
New
current.
Hope or the
uh,
United Right.
Yes, one of those. But
It's the
anyways,
same one.
it's major figures on the right that Gidon Saar, I can see him being prime minister. Naftali Bennett is also supposed to be, I think he's one of the people who are arguing about who's going to be leader of this party. So there are going to be interesting developments in Israeli politics. And again, there might be an election at some point. It just just one party needs to leave, I think, for this government to fall. So that could be interesting. Um, yeah, okay. I have a couple of other things to add about what's going on in Gaza and how this might affect Israeli politics, but I'll leave it to my closing remarks. Morgan.
I don't really have anything extra to add, so I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say.
So you mentioned the election, and we've talked about it before because the last election was in 2022, and some people have been calling for the new election, especially since the current government only has 64 seats. For the majority, you need 61. So pretty much, if any of the political entities, originally you had, let me to look, because originally you had Gideon Saar in the government, and also one more party was it? I think it was the National Unity. Was also Benny Gantz was also in the government. So originally you had like 76 seats, which is a comfortable majority. But after some problems with Netanyahu of these parties, basically both of them left. So now you are in the situation where if one more party leaves or threatens to leave, they in a sense can control Netanyahu or can control the direction of the government. And yeah, I don't think it will be interesting if it does happen, because you would have to call for snap election, which is not that unusual for Israel. Israel likes to have election at least once a year. Usually, they don't even bother waiting. They really like their elections. So while it wouldn't be out of ordinary to have this. The interesting fact is that this would be happening during the war, and as I mentioned, some party like I think it's called the Jewish Power in translation. Oh, it's Otzma Yehudit, not Yetzma Yehudit. Sorry for that.
Yeah, I think Jewish power is the right translation for that.
So I think they have about like twice as much percentages in the opinions polls as they used to have, and they have the ability to basically threaten the election. So they could come out of election favorably, but again, as we mentioned, generally the parties in the government are looking forward to an unfavorable election. So I don't think any of them it's in the interest of any of them to basically have an election. And again, I don't necessarily see the reason for calling an election. Again, the next one should be in about 2 years. And I think I'm wondering if we've done an episode about should there be a new election. But Razi, what do you think?
Well, so yeah, so Otzma Yehudit, that's Ben Gvir's party. He, according to some reports, has threatened to leave the government if there's no war in Lebanon, which is a correct position, I think, to take. And yeah, he would benefit from an election, at least according to polls. He would get 9 or 10 seats, which would give his Jewish power some more power. And with the other parties, yeah, Netanyahu obviously doesn't want an election, but he somehow seems to do well enough when they happen. One of the problems is having an election at a time of war is not a good idea. So. So that's yeah, that's gonna we'll see if that happens, and the fact is it'll be very, very difficult, very diff. I mean, Netanyahu is a master of weaseling his way out of things, but it'll be very difficult for him to weasel his way out of a war in Lebanon. Especially, he said a few days ago that the military operation in Gaza is winding down. There's no justification for it to wind down unless you are unable to fight a war, an all-out war on two fronts, and there is a necessary immediate need for a front in Lebanon because a chunk of the country is uninhabitable and has been for the better part of a year. And this basically it's as if Israel doesn't consider itself legitimate if it doesn't fight to defend the north. And I think this is one of the things that this new party, the Democrats, was talking about, is they want to prevent a war with Lebanon. Luckily, they're not going to have a say or much of a say because it's, as of now, just the Labor Party. They're in opposition. Unless there's an election, we're not going to hear too much from them. But yeah, Israeli politics is volatile, and the general situation in Israel is volatile. And I think they think the Democrats think that they can use that to their advantage. But I'm not sure that is the case. And we'll see. This was announced yesterday. So we're going to see later this week what the polls say. Typically, a new party is announced. People are excited. The polls will say something that on actual election day is not what they're going to get. They're probably going to get less. But yeah, let's see to what extent this has an impact. By the way, there is a chance that this will have an impact on like strengthening the right, or at least strengthening the Likud's position, because they will take votes from possibly from Benny Gantz as well. So yeah.
Yeah, so I would only add, because you mentioned the large part of Israel is uninhabitable. And yeah, many of the Israelis are still, like tens of thousands of Israelis are basically evacuated. I mean, I think it's even improper to call this an evacuation at this point, because evacuation should be something temporary. But this has been in place for, I mean, for almost 9 months now. Tens of thousands of Israelis were basically forced to basically it's from the north where Lebanon is, or on the border with Lebanon, because of Hezbollah. And again, Israel is not doing anything about it. Israel has a responsibility towards its citizens, which is not fulfilling. It has to do something about Lebanon. We cannot, it's bad enough that they are not acting properly uh, in Gaza, but the people evacuated from there are in relatively low numbers. But even those matter. I mean, even all the people there matter. But the fact that, yeah, Israel is not doing anything about it should be, yeah, completely, yeah. Mm. There is a right for it to describe it. I just cannot think of it. Unbelievable.
Sorry, Raz, did you say something?
Yeah, did you have anything to add?
No, I don't. I know little to nothing about Israeli domestic politics, but it's interesting listening to you guys.
Well, I will say about so PC says in the chat, Lebanon is a failed state. Yes, it is, but it is a state and it has a certain responsibility for what happens within its borders and what is done from within its borders to others. Lebanon, as we said in the title of a show we did a few weeks ago, Lebanon is the enemy when it comes to the north and what is happening in the north of Israel. All of Lebanon should feel the consequences of their actions in this war that is coming, hopefully sooner rather than later, because again, this is going to be much worse for Israel than what is going on in Gaza. Probably worse for Israel in terms of casualties than October 7th. But if it's not every day that this war isn't happening, is more deaths for when the war eventually does happen. And yes, of course, behind it all is Iran, and Iran should be on the list of targets as well. Well, again, we're covering this issue on a daily basis, and I've made the point of why that is, but tomorrow we'll make that point very clearly on the daily objective when I'm joined by Adam Mossoff. We will talk about why this is the most important issue of our lifetime. Then we will talk about something that is a slightly less important issue, but important nonetheless if you live in the UK and have to um, you don't have to vote, but you have the option of voting on Thursday. And the question is, should you vote Reform UK? On that show, some people will say yes, some people will say no. Spoiler alert, one of those who will say no is me. But yeah, that's going to be an interesting debate-like show. We will try not to have too many we finally killed Medicare moments or whatever it was that he said, but we will also have something that you didn't see much of in the debate last week, which is substance. So hopefully your PC says I am voting Tory. Well, another spoiler is that I'm going to say it's better to vote Tory than to vote Reform. But for more about that, tune in tomorrow. Thanks, everybody. Willful Thinker asks, is sexual orientation innate? I don't know. I think as far as we don't know that you are, that this is something that you go at some point and you make a choice. Okay, I'm going to find this type of person attractive and this type of person unattractive. I think that's kind of, but that's not a question for me. That's a question for scientists. I don't know that there's a very conclusive answer, but I tend to assume that it is more kind of an immutable characteristic than something that we choose. All right.
Yeah, I would only quickly say it could be innate, it could be psychological, it could be developmental. The main point is it is not a moral issue. It is the fact that you're gay doesn't make you evil, doesn't make you good.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that positive note, thanks guys. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Bye.